Hello, everyone. Jason Haas here for the normal Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast from Tablas Creek. I am here, however, from an unusual location. I'm not actually in California, on vacation in Vermont where I grew up. So this background that you see here is not a Californian background at all. I grew up in the mountains of southern Vermont, and still try to get back here every year. Wasn't able to make it last year, but I'm here now. So anyway, I'm enjoying it, and still want to keep up with this normal Wednesday tradition. So my guest this week is going to be Ray Isle, who you may know as the executive wine editor of Food and Wine magazine, but he does lots of other cool stuff too. I'll be asking him to join in just a couple of minutes, but as I usually do, I want to start by showing you some pictures of what's going on in the vineyard. And thank you to Ian Consoli, our director of marketing at Tablas, for taking the time to walk around the vineyard and send me a bunch of photos. So I want to start with the progress of the grapes. So you can see where we are. The grapes are getting larger. They're almost full size now. We're probably a month or so away from the beginnings of veraison when they start to turn color. So this is Grenache. I'll give you some contrasting other pictures. So Mourvedre, almost as large, not quite as even. That's normal for Mourvedre. You see some different sizes. And then finally Counoise, which is the smallest at this stage. These are still basically pea-sized. But they're on their way to being even larger than the other two. And it's just a question of when they get started and when they're ready to ripen. We're still a couple months at least away from the beginning of harvest. I did want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the vineyard. As you probably know, if you're in California, it's been hot. We've had a couple of days around 105 to, I think we got up to 107 one day. But the vineyard looks amazing. This is a head-trained Counoise vine. It's not showing any signs of stress. The vineyard, it's been surprising us all year with how vigorous and healthy everything looks. So, a couple of other things of what we're doing out in the vineyard. This is, of course, a time of year when the sheep can't be in the vineyard. So we have them in an area on our new property where they have some shade. They're next to the woodlands. We're actually going to be fencing them into the woodlands so they do some work of eating the understory and keeping the fire risk down. Of course, this is a wilder part of the property, so there's a decent chance that our mastiffs are going to come in handy here. This is Bjorn looking proprietary of his sheep. And then finally, I wanted to introduce our new shepherd. Many of you know that Nathan, was our first shepherd, has been with us for the last 6 years. Left for a cool opportunity to run his own place in Mexico. So let me introduce you to Dane. Ian is working on an interview blog with him, which you'll get to see in the next couple of weeks. But he is great. Comes to us from a neighboring ranch. And then in the cellar, we are working on blending all of the 2020 reds. We decided on the blends about 6 weeks ago, and we've been bottling, waiting to free up space. Now they're physically getting put together. So we've been putting the Esprit together and the other red blends from 2020. And as the rest of the space frees up, we're going to be putting them into big fooders to age. And then finally, the kind of our biggest news at the vineyard itself is that we are almost ready to reopen our tasting room indoors. The first reservations that we are taking are for this Friday. So just a couple of days away. We've been doing a little soft opening with inviting some people to come inside and experience the indoor tasting room. So if you have not checked out what this is all about, wrote a blog about it a couple of weeks ago. Basically, you'll be able to choose between doing a seated flight tasting indoors with bar seating or having a private table for your flight tasting outdoors. So we're excited to start this and look forward to being able to welcome people both inside and out. Okay, I am going to stop sharing this and then invite Ray to join me for the conversation. So I see him. There he is. Excellent. So Ray, I'm assuming, will be joining me from New York. Interesting that we are doing a Paso Robles Instagram Live from Vermont and New York. Hello, Ray.
Move myself back a little bit here. It's always kind of figuring out the nature of the the angle with the dual screen is a little tricky. But I'm here.
Excellent. Is here New York? Are you at the
Here,
Food Wine
yeah,
offices
just
there?
not to make people like seasick or anything, but that's basically the wine room at Food and Wine. So that is where I am at the moment, which is not a bad place to be. I've been coming in. I was lucky in a sense, but during the pandemic because no one else has access to the wine room, so I had a COVID-free locked room that's literally bigger than my apartment in New York to hang out in, which helped sanity a lot. So that was good.
And you and I have something in common in that big chunks of our offices decamped for Birmingham, Alabama in
This is true.
in recent years.
Yeah. And weirdly, like one of our Food and Wines, our executive food editor lives across the street from Greg, the head of Vineyard Brands. it's a very small world, especially the Birmingham part, which I didn't really realize before.
Yeah, the whole food and wine world is remarkably small and close and interweaving, which is always fascinating.
Yeah.
Cool. So I usually like to start by asking people to kind of share their path into wine. Was wine something that was on your table growing up? Did you know that this was something you wanted to do as a part of your life?
Not even remotely. It's funny. I just posted on Facebook a picture of my dad from when we were camping in Colorado when I was a kid, and he's sitting there holding a Coors and a beer cozy, and he was very excited at the time because Coors was not available in Texas. You had to go to the Rockies to get it, and then it became available. But that was, there was not wine on the table so much. there was occasionally beer and maybe some whiskey. I grew up in Texas, and then I had no remote concept of being in the wine business at all till pretty late in the game. I went down a graduate school path in creative writing and English. And I got interested in wine just in terms of drinking it when I was living in DC mostly, kind of in an interim between graduate programs. I was managing a rare bookstore in DC and got interested in wine. And then I got a graduate writing fellowship at Stanford, which put me in the Bay Area. And since I was already kind of interested in wine, I started going to wineries, as one does, to taste. And I started going to wineries all the time to taste. And then one of the guys, so I owe K&L Wines in Redwood City a big debt because one of the guys there, who was the sales guy that I usually talk to with my $20 of graduate, spare money to buy wines. He said, this guy, Dwayne Cronin in the Santa Cruz Mountains was looking for someone to help with bottling. And if I was interested, I should do it. And I went up and helped Dwayne, who's since passed away, but I helped him bottle some Chardonnay, and you got paid in Chardonnay, which for me was great because I couldn't afford expensive wine. And then I started helping with bottlings in other places in the Santa Cruz Mountains and up in Napa. And then I switched my teaching schedule around to where I could work as a cellar rat during harvest for 2 harvests. And then I got to the end of that and I was like, I hate academia. I'm tired of this miserable world of people who can't stand each other. And look, the wine world, it's full of wine and full of pretty cool people. And so I switched and then for a number of random reasons, I thought I was going to move to Napa or Sonoma. I ended up in New York being the supplier rep for Dows and Graham's port because they wanted someone with an educational background who could explain port, but who also liked port. And they got me the job and with 0 sales experience whatsoever. So I did that for a couple of years and freelanced as a journalist on the side. And eventually Josh Green at Wine and Spirits read something I'd written and got in touch with me about freelancing. And that quickly turned into an editorial job. And then I was sort of off and running in wine. The writing and the wine came together. And I stayed at Wine and Spirits for about 5 years. And then I moved to Food and Wine and been here ever since. But I got very fortunate in a number of ways. I mean, I won, if I'd gotten a writing fellowship at, Michigan or Iowa, I wouldn't be in the wine business today, and I think of myself more in the wine business than I do as in the magazine business. I could see doing another job in wine. I don't really see myself doing it, like editing a fashion magazine or something. And then
editing the sports page.
Yeah, just though weirdly there are a number of ex-sports writers who've gone on to write about wine. So something about the details, that gets people. And then I just got lucky that Josh saw this piece that I'd written. It wasn't even about wine, and it was for the it was for an alumni magazine, and it said in the little bio that Ray Isle writes, sells wine in New York when he's not writing, and he reached out to me, and then it just kind of worked out really well. We got along. I went to work for him, and it was a great place to spend several years. So,
yeah, Josh is great. He's
yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who, in one way or another, he's kind of introduced into the world of wine, certainly into the world of wine writing.
Yeah, that was very much the case for me. And it was, wine and spirits, it's not quite what I do now, but, when we were tasting, it's the kind of classic thing where you're tasting for a massive tasting section, and you're tasting, 40 McLaren Vale Shiraz in the morning, and then 40 McLaren Vale Shiraz in the afternoon. And then the next day is like 40 Barossa Shiraz, and then 40 Barossa Shiraz in the afternoon. And if you do that for 5 years, it's a very, very good baseline education in wine, at least in terms of what things taste like, and how much alcohol can be in Shiraz in the early 2000s.
Cool.
Yeah.
So in your work at Food and Wine, what is your sort of week to week, day to day, month to month, kind of work life like?
Well, let's just take last year and set it aside.
Right. Okay. Pre or post pandemic.
Which seemed to be somewhat different than the normal year. So my days are a mix of, because I both write and edit, and I do some work for TNet, Travel and Leisure, as well as Food and Wine. But my day sometimes involves tasting, but not always. Sometimes involves writing, but not always. Sometimes involves, more often than I'd like, random Zoom meetings or meetings, edit meetings, whatever meetings, just a lot of meetings. And it's a mix of the kind of, and then sometimes assigning out stories or working on someone else's story. And then a lot of editorial planning, because I kind of oversee the wine coverage for the magazine, essentially. And then involved in planning the issues with the rest of the staff. So, like today I turned up, I answered a bunch of emails, as one does. I tasted 7 or 8 wines as potentials for one of the seminars I'm doing in Aspen this year. What else did I do after that? I retasted a couple of wines from a Zoom tasting I did yesterday, but I wanted to see what had happened to them after 24 hours of air. I then cut my September column to fit the actual layout, which is what happens with magazines. You write it, you give it to the art department creates the layout for it, you get it back, you're like, you cut all my words, you fight back and forth for a while about it, and then eventually there's some balance point where they don't cut all your words, but you still have to cut it to make it fit. Right. So I did that. That was about 2 hours, and then I seem to be doing an Instagram Live at the moment. And,
cool. So it's not as though you have dozens of articles to write about wine in an issue of Food and Wine.
Right. You
usually have like an article or two in a normal magazine.
Yeah, I typically have my monthly column, which is baseline. My monthly column is a wine recommendation column. It is thematic, so it could be biodynamic wines, it could be Willamette Pinot Noirs, it could be wines for grilling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's within a section called bottle service that typically has one or two other freelance or other like short profiles or sometimes other pieces. And then I do feature articles several times a year that are longer and more substantial pieces. And then I also kind of do a few shorter wine travel stories each, throughout the year. And then I occasionally do some features for Travel and Leisure. So it's a mix of shorter servicey stuff and longer, honestly, somewhat more rewarding writing stuff. I'd rather write something in depth that gets into the character of a place or the character of the people, or right. than here's a nugget about a 2019 Chianti Classico.
Yeah,
whatever. But it's still, I mean, that the fun part of the service stuff is the tasting, because it's still a blast to taste through 20 wines and find 5 that you think are really great, or 3 that you think are really great. It does get a little mechanical, by trying to avoid this endless taste blackberries, smoke.
We had the experience recently where we tasted through every vintage of Roussan we've ever made. We do
Yeah.
these vertical tastings every summer. We pick a different wine and go through every vintage, and like coming up with ways of distinguishing between wines that are super similar to start with. It's the same thing. It's like, how many different ways can I say hazelnuts and honey and white flowers? Like,
Right.
and have it be reflective of what those wines are actually like.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, the nature of writing prose in a magazine context or in a book context is you don't want to repeat the same words over and over again because it looks like you've just run out of words or something. The problem is if you are doing Russian River Pinot Noir, there's just a lot of black cherry floating around there, and so you get into this bind where you can't describe every single wine as we're calling black cherries, but but you also can't say that it tastes like bananas because it doesn't. So it's perplexing.
I can't remember whose quote this is, but I remember reading a quote that said that writing about wine is like dancing about architecture. In that you're putting into words something which is an entirely different sense. To start with.
But that's I mean, what you could say is actually writing about wine is like writing about architecture. And one of my graduate professors in literature pointed out that really the only form of criticism that's directly in the same medium as the work itself is literary criticism, which is words talking about words. Because if you're writing movie criticism, or you're writing art criticism, you're writing dance criticism, or you're writing wine, describing wines, all of that is using words to describe something that's not words, which automatically puts noise in the equation. With wine, it's also this weird, and it's probably true for dance and things like that too. But it's this odd mix of, there are things that are actually true or not true about it. Like it, smells like oak. Well, it either was within oak or it was not in oak. It seems, tart. Well, you can measure acidity, but when you start saying blackberries and raspberries, maybe yes, maybe no, some of the compounds are there. Hard to know, hard to pin down exactly what gives a raspberry its flavor. And are you talking about really ripe raspberries? Are you talking about wild raspberries? And then you get into stuff like, the words people love to hate on, which is fair. Like it's gossamer or svelte or clunky, which are purely aesthetic judgments that don't have a cognate to the actual liquid in the bottle, except it helps people understand it. So yeah. So there's more to those little, I'm just pointing out, there's more to those little write-ups than people give us credit for.
I have enormous sympathy. I mean, I'm adjacent enough to doing those sorts of things that I know how hard they are, and I know how hard it is to kind of capture the essence of an experience in what usually is just a couple of sentences, and do it in a way that helps people understand whether or not it's going to be something that they're going to like.
Well, and this has come up recently, there's also these questions of culture and language, which, and there's some simple ones, like everybody uses gooseberries to describe Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. And, you can count on one hand the number of people in the US who've had a gooseberry in the last year. It's like, so there's all this US prose talking about gooseberries to an audience that doesn't eat gooseberries, which makes no sense. Tobacco. I mean, tobacco used to be a very easy cognate for a lot of people, but there's just not as much tobacco around as there used to be, thankfully.
Right.
And then you get into cultural things like if you describe a wine as tasting like truffles. Well, some people don't get the opportunity to try truffles when they're a kid, but everybody gets the chance to try Jolly Ranchers. So, which seems to be a very, very universal wine description item.
Except if your winemaker is British, which ours is.
Right.
And we'll talk about, like, as we're sitting around the table, we'll talk about these various candy descriptors. And he's just like, yeah, I didn't grow up with any of those. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. And they say things like lemon drop, and you're like, what's a lemon drop? So yeah, it's complicated.
We need an American to English translator for flavor compounds.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you see your role vis-a-vis wine in general as the wine editor in Food and Wine? Do you feel like you have a mission that you're trying to advance?
Yes, I mean, my hope is to, is to overthrow the government in a small country with wine and take over. Um, so, no, I mean, my mission is to some degree to do what happened to me, which is to make people fall in love with wine because I did. And I didn't come from a wine background. And so Food and Wine's been a very good place for me to be because our audience, while it has a lot of people in the trade in it, it's really big. I mean, our circulation's 980,000 and our readership's like 7 million. So the vast majority of our audience is interested in wine, likes to drink it, but doesn't necessarily know a tremendous amount about it. And so, and as a magazine writer, at least in the context of writing for a magazine, I try and keep the reader in mind all the time because, I can write about titratable acidity and, redox, whatever, but no one will get it and no one cares in a consumer readership. And what they do care about is this wine going to, is this a fascinating story? Is this a wine that's going to make me, that's really cool? And will they walk away from it really wanting to buy more wine and be part of this thing, this world of wine? So if I have a mission, I guess that's it. It's to kind of turn more people onto wine, which in the US is a good one because we largely weren't a wine drinking country for many, many years. I mean, we were a beer and milk drinking country or something. Much more so now. I mean, wine has become cool, which is, never thought that would happen, but seems to have done so. And so I guess that's my mission as in a broad way. And then personally, I mean, if I have a mission, is to just write really well about what I'm writing about, and to find stories that are compelling to me, and not just useful as service stuff. I mean, I'm much more interested if there's truly a story behind it. If there's, whether it's about the place or the person, or some combination of the two, that probably as a former fiction writer, that really compels me.
Yeah, and I think wine writing done well, it really highlights the fact that wine is one of the very few products that is kind of inextricably connected to place.
Yes.
I mean, it's very different than cotton or strawberries or whiskey even.
Yeah, it's unusual. I mean, I do find there's some, obviously coffee has started talking about, I mean, it's very interesting how coffee basically adopted, and the coffee people will probably get annoyed by this, but,
Oh, I've lost your audio. Ray, I've lost your audio. I don't know if so perhaps you could if you leave and then rejoin, then we will I think the sound will come back. Okay. I'm going to kick Ray out. So Ray, I'm gonna remove you and then just ask to join again. So welcome back to Vermont, everyone. I heard a little rumble of thunder. We are expecting thunderstorms tonight. If you do hear them in the background, that is why. So I'm going to again invite Ray to join now, send a request, and
okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Great.
I
You're
think
back.
whoever said the coffee consortium stole the audio, don't mess with the coffee people. They will get you. They're all jacked up on caffeine and, tints.
But yeah, I mean, you're totally right. That coffee and I think cheese, and maybe like you're starting to see it a little bit with cider, which makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But you're right that they have a sort of adopted the language of kind of wine and appellations and terroir. But it really starts with wine.
and you start to see it with weed too, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And it's which I find kind of fascinating. And it's the whether it's whether these things express terroir in the same way or not is somewhat up in the air. I mean, I fall into this all the time because I'm not that big. I like coffee fine, but I don't really care that much about it. And and this is one of those sort of mortifying things where.
Okay, I feel like I have just lost Ray again, but it's possible that this is on my end, given that it just started to rain out here. Um, if anyone can leave a comment, if you can hear me. Oh, lost Ray again. Okay. It's frozen. Okay, I'm going to. Re-invite Ray, send a request. We will see if this works. Okay, I'm happy you can hear me. I just re-invited Ray.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
I don't know what's going on. It's very strange.
I'm
Maybe we
sure
better not talk about coffee anymore.
It's Manhattan, man. You can't trust the internet connectivity in a place like that.
Yeah, it's really weird. Don't know what's going on.
I can hear you. Your video is frozen, but your audio sounds loud and clear. So I think we just go with that.
Oh, that's odd. Why it keeps going out. Let's talk about wine.
Let's seriously. We don't know whether it's the cheese mafia, the coffee mafia. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the events that you have a hand in organizing. I mean, Aspen is legendary. Talk about how those work.
Well, Aspen didn't work last year. That was a bummer, actually. First time in 35, 40 years or whatever. We did move it to September, which as we've talked about, you and I, is kind of great unless you're a winemaker. It'll go back to June next year, so which is good. The events are Food and Wine. The only one we actually own is Aspen. The others are all sponsorship arrangements, and sometimes tied to advertising. And sometimes the sponsorship arrangements involve me speaking at them. Sometimes they don't if they're primarily food related. But they are. I mean, Aspen, when it's at full strength, is 5,000 people. It's a year-long, massive effort to put that thing on. And thankfully, I have very little to do with the logistics. In fact, almost nil. But I do have a lot to do with the wine seminars and who we've got speaking at the wine seminars and what the topics are to some degree, because every time, basically the way it works is we choose a slate of speakers, they submit ideas, everybody submits grower champagne, and then we kind of go back to them and say, you can't all do grower champagne again. And so we sort it out that way. And it's, I love it because, and we then had the sub event within Aspen that we aren't doing for this September one because it's a smaller version called Psalm Talks, which I kind of came up with a few years ago to try and create. It actually came a little bit out of being at the Pebble Beach event and being aware of the kind of Psalm community that was involved. And I thought, well, what if we created an event that created a Psalm community where they could all talk, where a bunch of Psalms could come together and talk and network and taste great wines, but they didn't have to work. And that seemed like a really kind of nifty idea, as opposed to like, you can come and have a great time, but we're going to work you to death. And because they get, people in restaurants get worked to death all the time anyway. So why should we do that? So that's been a blast. That's been a really wonderful event that I've really enjoyed putting together. And then I love doing the consumer seminars too, because they are, talking to a live audience is great because you get not just direct question feedback, you get the energy in the room. And when people are into wine or into what you're talking about, you can really feel it. It is true that I have some experience teaching college classes as well. It's unusual teaching wine seminars because about 45 minutes in, everybody then is basically drunk if they're consumers because they never spit anything because they paid $100 for the tasting. They're not going to spit one drop of wine.
And usually these are wines that are like legendary wines. I mean, if you're going to show them at a seminar, an event like that, they're going to be special.
But even if they're not legendary, they're going to drink them. You know, the trade is a little different. The trade will spit the ones they don't like. You know, so, but it is interesting because there is always that moment where you realize you're starting to lose some people, and like especially like with Aspen, if you have a 2 p.m. seminar, then the older guys. And I can say this because I'm heading towards being an older guy. You'll start to see the older guys kind of do the nod off thing because it's after lunch and they had wine with lunch and they're drinking wine at the seminar, and then, you know, it's warm and it's like nap time for you know, for the gray haired set. And then, you know, and then some groups of people become extremely lively and you're kind of like, you guys need to calm down a little bit. But, you know, it's all good fun. So, and,
do you have a particular seminar that you organized that you felt like was really memorable and outstanding and one of a kind and like just a moment that was something that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, different worlds. But so with the Som Talk seminars, I tend to organize them, but I don't. I mean, I may be on the panel, but I'm not the center of the show, so to speak. So, you know, when we had, you know, Michael Cruz came in and we did a panel that was about dosage in sparkling wines. And that was fascinating because we did different dosages of different champagnes. But we also, Michael actually made wines for the seminar at the same wine at different dosage levels.
Cool.
And it wasn't linear, which was the fascinating thing. You know, you would think it'd be a straight arc, like the more sugar, the more you'd perceive the sugar in the wine, and it didn't necessarily work that way, which blew everybody's mind. So like the sweet spot might be, you know, 4 grams might not work, 6 grams might work pretty well, 8 grams was terrible, and then 10 grams was good. That kind of thing. But then on the consumer side, I've done a seminar a few times that I love doing, which is I pair wines with different flavors of potato chips. Because, I mean, wine pairing can be way overdone, but it is true that different things taste different together. And if you take potato chips are a great medium because they're very simple. It's like you get salt, and then you get salt and vinegar, and then you get barbecue, which always has sugar in it, and then you get something spicy like a jalapeno chip. Those isolated flavors work really clear. It's very clear what they do to the wine in your mouth, and that's a blast. And plus, it involves potato chips. Potato chips, you know. And I usually walk off with extra bags of potato chips, which is my secret reason for doing that seminar.
That sounds great. No, I love that idea that you're always trying to simplify things so that when you do vary things, you're varying one variable. And that's one of the hard things about food and wine pairing is that like there's so many different ingredients in most dishes you might pair. It's hard to isolate what the impact is of any one of them. I love the idea of the potato chips.
Yeah, it's very, if you take, you know, it's one of the counterintuitive things that if you have a really tart vinaigrette on a salad, for instance, you actually, it's better with a tart wine than you would think it would be good with a big rich Chardonnay. It'll kill the Chardonnay. If you have it with Sauvignon Blanc, it works pretty well. And when you do that with a chip, if you take like a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you take a sip, you eat a salt and vinegar chip, and you take a sip, the perception of acidity in your mouth decreases dramatically, and the fruit comes out in the wine. And it's wild to watch an audience do that. It's a blast because they're kind of like, whoa, this is cool. You know, that's not what you're going to eat for dinner because you don't just have a big plate of salt and vinegar chips, like you said.
Not judging.
But, you know, but it's still, it's more just kind of gives people somewhere to go with this idea that pairing wines with foods, you know, is, if nothing else, kind of fun.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, we are at half an hour, which I can't believe. I had like 8 more things I wanted to ask you, but I have 2 kind of one quick question and then one like little wrap up thing. The last question that I had was, obviously you see hundreds or thousands of wines come across your table in any given year.
Yeah.
Like, are there things that you think people should be paying attention to that they aren't in wine, a region or a style or something like that?
Yeah. Again, it's like consumer versus trade is a big question. I mean, I think, on some level, I think that people who are I hope that there's a kind of shift in how people are tasting wine, in that, there's been or buying wine, maybe. There's been a predominance, kind of dominating paradigm of, it got 90 points, it tastes really great. If 90 points actually means it tastes really great, and I think what you've seen with food is there's a much more interest in sourcing and where it came from, how it was grown, how it was made, and I think that is certainly within the wine business has become much more of a concern, or central concern. And I think with consumers, particularly younger consumers, that's happening with wine too. And I think those questions of the story of the wine, whether that's the story of how it was made or the story of who made it, really do inform your experience of the wine. And it's a very gratifying and meaning and useful way to taste wine, to take those things into account. And so I wish the entire consumer world would move more towards that, especially because there's so much wine out there that's truly an industrial product. It's which is fine. I mean, it's like, I like, occasionally drink a Diet Coke. A Diet Coke does not have terroir that I know of. It is a chemical product on some level. Whatever, that's cool. You want to drink it, drink it. But wine can be something other than that, and that's a really, really vital thing.
And that's, I think, one of the encouraging things about the fact that there are now wineries in every state, and going out wine tasting, visiting wine country, like that's a thing in a way that it wasn't even when I started out at Tablas Creek in 2002. That was pre-Sideways and pre kind of the explosion of local wine all over the country. And I feel like it's a really critical evolution in the American wine consuming kind of paradigm that maybe doesn't get as much attention as it might. People visit wineries now.
We just did a story that was a kind of a series of wine road trips to not the West Coast states. It's Michigan, Virginia, New York, and there's wonderful wineries out there that are making good wine. I do think it often helps that there's kind of like a critical mass of ambitious wineries in the state, and honestly, to some degree, weather matters too. It's like Southern Florida is really tough for wine grapes, but
Louisiana, not easy.
Louisiana, I mean, I grew up in Houston. It's like, you want rot, you can get rot really quick. But that said, in the Hill Country and in the Texas Plains, there are a number of really good wineries at this point doing really interesting stuff. Because they don't have national distribution most of the time, they don't get national attention. But they've got more and more and more local attention, which I think is a really great thing. And that's true of all of these states. I mean, there's some beautiful Rieslings out of Michigan that Michigan people know about, and a few people in the business, and but no one in Nevada knows about them.
And honestly, you can't find them in California. It's only when I have somebody who visits the winery from one of these other states and brings me local stuff that I get a chance to see it.
Right.
And it would be different if I were near K&L or Winehouse or whatever, one of the great wine shops in California. But I'm in Paso Robles. I'm 4 hours away from the Bay Area and 4 hours away from Los Angeles. So you're sort of limited to local stuff, and then the things that come from the old world regions that the locals kind of make riffs on. So you can actually find a really good Rhone selection in most of the places, like most of the cool restaurants in Paso Robles, because all of the Rhone producers there want to try Bandol, want to try Chateauneuf, want to try Van Sobra. I mean, they want to try these things and see them, so there's a market for them.
But not so much Gruner Veltliner or something.
Not so much. No, it's shocking.
Which would be really tasty in Paso Robles, especially when it's hot.
I'm hoping that our foray into Vermentino brings more options from Liguria and Sardinia to our local shelves.
That would be cool. Yeah, you guys are definitely like broadening the Paso Robles range there.
Cool. Okay. So last thing, if people want to learn more about what you do, to follow your work, to see things when you publish them, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I mean, easiest way is foodandwine.com, which we don't have a paywall, so all my stuff is there. You have to find it because there's a bazillion posts on foodandwine.com all the time, but I'm there. Follow me on Instagram. Hey, follow me on Instagram. You know, I do post a lot of what I do on Instagram, and on, you know, Twitter less so. I just got worn out by Twitter. It just seemed like a cesspit a lot of the time. And Instagram's fun. It's pictures, you know. And then, you know, I'm reachable through those, you know, through those places pretty easily. You know, should anybody want to reach out to me, but yeah, I mean, and buy the magazine. Buy magazines. Magazines are great. You know, I'm all for magazines. I hope that print on paper continues, even though it's kind of rough on trees.
Yeah, but good for words. Good for the lifespan of words.
Yeah, I'm Ray Isle on Instagram. It's very easy. You know, there's a nice thing about having a fairly unusual name.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ray. Thank you for persevering through the technical hiccups.
Yeah, that was unusual, but what the hell, it worked. I still think it was the coffee people. And what I was going to say, and I'll say it now because if they cut us off, it doesn't matter, is that as a wine person, I'm totally guilty of looking at coffee descriptions and thinking, oh, that's just complete ridiculousness. That doesn't taste like that. Which, of course, there are plenty of people who look at wine things that I write and are like, oh, that's just bullshit. So, you know, we all live in our own little worlds.
We do.
Post my Instagram name, please. I assume they're talking to me.
Yes. I think that came out like right as you, that comment came in right as you actually said it. So,
well,
so Ray,
everybody.
Yep.
Anyway, this is fun. I wish I could come visit. You know, well, actually, I can come visit now. We can travel again.
Absolutely. You can come and visit California, or you can just make an easy drive up to Vermont, where I am at the moment.
Oh, all right. Well, maybe I'll swing up there. That sounds good.
Awesome.
Jason, it's great to see you. This is
cool.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. There's a heads up, it'll be 2 weeks until the next one, and we'll have kind of a different take on wine writing. We'll have Aaron Brooks, who is a contributor to The Wine Advocate, who writes about the wines of the Central Coast and Oregon. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, thank you so much, and thank you again, Ray. This is really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.